All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Seneca's Letters to Lucilius. We are on letter 59. All right, and this is a letter called on Pleasure and Joy. So let's just jump right into this here. He says in verse 1, I received great pleasure from your letter. Kindly allow me to use these words in their everyday meaning without insisting upon their Stoic import. For we Stoics hold that pleasure is a vice. Very likely, it is a vice, but we are accustomed to use the word when we wish to indicate a happy state of mind. So he's just basically saying here, look, I got some pleasure from reading your letter. However, it's not the vice kind of pleasure. Let's just, let's step away from the Stoic philosophy for a minute and just say, hey, thanks for sending me the letter. I enjoyed it. All right. He says here in verse 2, I'm aware that if we test words by our formula, even pleasure is a thing of ill repute, and joy can be attained only by the wise. For joy is an elation of spirit, of a spirit which trusts in the goodness and the truth of its own possessions. The common usage, however, is that we derive great joy from a friend's position as counsel, or from his marriage, or from the birth of his child. But these events, so far from being matters of joy, are more often the beginnings of sorrow to come. No, it is a characteristic of real joy that it never ceases and that it never changes into its opposite. Okay, so what is he saying here? So he's saying this, look, all right, he's breaking this down to use this as an example to say, certain words. So he says, we have a formula that we test certain words by, okay? He's saying even pleasure is a thing of ill repute. So pleasure, we say is not necessarily a good thing, okay? Because it has its opposite that's coming. And joy can only be attained by the wise. So he says that true joy is an elation of the spirit, okay? And he says it's of a spirit which trusts in goodness and the truth of its own possessions. So joy in itself is a thing that it cannot be taken. It is a pure thing in itself. Now he's saying the common usage, all right, is that we get joy from a friend, his promotion, from his marriage, from the birth of his child, but these events, okay, they're not actually matters of joy because they're often the beginning of sorrows to come, right? Because each of these things, as you gain these things, they can be taken from you. And indeed, they will, because all things come to an end. And so he's saying that true joy is that it never ceases and never changes into the opposite, right? So that's how we can determine what is really, really joyful in our life. And so when we think that good things are happening to us, sometimes those things are not good. Sometimes when we're experiencing pleasure, that's not truly a good, in the sense that it can turn into the opposite, and it often does, right? And so that's what he's pointing out here, is to understand what true joy is. All right, now he says here in verse 3, accordingly, when our Virgil speaks of the evil joys of the mind, his words are eloquent, but not strictly appropriate, for no joy can be evil. He has given the name joy to pleasures and has thus expressed his meaning, for he has conveyed the idea that men take delight in their own evil. So he's quoting the poet Virgil, and he's saying that Virgil said the evil joys of the mind, and he's saying here, no, joy cannot be evil, okay? Joy is a pure thing. All right. And so what he's saying is that this poet, he's really used the word joy where he meant pleasure, at least for our definitions of such, because we have to have some definitions for word to understand what they mean. All right. And nevertheless, I was not wrong in saying that I received great pleasure from your letter, for although an ignorant man may derive joy if the cause be an honorable one, yet since his emotion is wayward and is likely soon to take another direction, I call it pleasure, for it is inspired by an opinion concerning a spurious good. It exceeds control and is carried to excess. Okay, so he's saying that he didn't call it joy. He actually said it was pleasure, and it is because it is spurious. Okay, it is carried to excess. It will disappear. It is not a permanent thing. It is not that constant joy that he spoke of earlier. All right, now he says here, but to return to the subject, let me tell you what delighted me in your letter. You have your words under control. You're not carried away by your language or borne beyond the limits which you have determined upon. Okay, so this is good. He's giving some compliments here. What is he saying? What are the compliments? Okay. You have your words under control. So you know what you're saying. You're not just going everywhere. You're not carried away by your language. You're not just saying flowerful things. There's some meaning behind this. Or born beyond the limits which you have determined upon. So you're not going past the things that you know about or going in all these different directions. He says in verse 5, many writers are tempted by the charm of some alluring phrase to some topic other than that which they had set themselves to discuss. But this has not been so in your case. All your words are compact and suited to the subject. You say all that you wish, and you mean still more than you say. This is a proof of the importance of your subject matter, showing that your mind, as well as your words, contain nothing superfluous or bombastic. So again, he's complimenting him and saying that, there's a lot of writers that they're tempted to come up with some alluring phrase or, a topic that they didn't really intend to discuss, which you could say Seneca actually does that quite a few times in his letters. Okay. But he says, no, your words are compact. Okay. They're on the subject. You say what you want to say. You don't say more than that. And you mean more than what you're actually saying. There's more depth to this in what you're saying. Okay. So he says in verse 6, I do, however, find some metaphors, not indeed daring ones, but the kind which have stood the test of use. I find similes also, of course, if anyone forbids us to use them, maintaining that poets alone have that privilege, he has not apparently read any of our ancient prose writers who had not yet learned to affect a style that should win applause. For those writers, whose eloquence was simple and directed only towards proving their case, are full of comparisons, and I think that these are necessary, not for the same reason which makes them necessary for the poets, but in order that they may serve as props to our feebleness, to bring both speaker and listener face to face with the subject under discussion. Okay, so quite a bit here. So he's saying that there's some metaphors and there's some similes in here, and he is saying that a lot of times people would see this as a detriment, or they would say that these things are only for the poets. But he's saying that perhaps you haven't read the ancient prose writers who did do this style, and had not yet learned to affect a style that would win applause. So they weren't doing this for show. Okay. He says that those writers, the eloquence was simple and directed only towards proving their case. That was it. Okay. And they're still full of comparisons. So it's okay to use similes and metaphors. Now, one thing that's an interesting thing to note here, I think, is that just how much care was taken to speech and writing in those days, right? And just how much people thought about how to say things and how to speak in a right way, and the words they use, the metaphors and things like that. I think that's something that is somewhat of a lost art. Now, Seneca, of course, knocks the people who are doing this because he's saying, look, what you're saying, you're not really speaking the point. You're just trying to win people's applause by the way that you're delivering it. But even though Seneca says that, I do think that it is somewhat of a lost art, and we've gone too far the other way now. Well, actually, not even too far the other way. We're not even speaking direct. We're speaking in ways that just aren't well thought out, and I think that is a good argument to make. Now he says here in verse 7, for example, I am at this very moment reading Sextius. He is a keen man and a philosopher who, though he writes in Greek, has the Roman standard of ethics. One of his similes appeared especially to me, that of an army marching in a hollow square, in a place where the enemy might be expected to appear from any quarter ready for battle. This, said he, is just what the wise man ought to do. He should have all his fighting qualities deployed on every side, so that wherever the attack threatens, there his supports may be ready to hand and may obey the captain's command without confusion. This is what we notice in armies which serve under great leaders. See how all the troops simultaneously understand their general's orders, since they are so arranged that a signal given by one man passes down the ranks of cavalry and infantry at the same moment. Okay, so he's talking about another writer that he's reading, Sextius, who's obviously written in Greek, but he's comparing him to the Romans, all right? And he says here that one of the similes that he uses, okay, this comparison, that has appealed to him was that of an army marching in a hollow square in a place where the enemy might be expected to appear from any quarter ready for battle, okay? And he's saying that if you can imagine this, okay, this is an army. They're marching in this hollow square, okay, so the enemy could come from any direction, right? Because you don't have any quarter. You don't have anywhere to hide behind. Right? And he says, this is just what a wise man ought to do. He should have all his fighting qualities deployed on every side. So wherever the attack threatens, there his supports may be ready to hand and maybe obey the captain's command without confusion. All right. So he's given this a really good example, and he's showing how a simile can actually be pretty useful to convey a point, because you can understand that very clearly. Right? As a wise man, yeah, you should be ready for anywhere. And also this idea that one command given, it goes through all the ranks of the soldiers. Okay, so let's move on here. All right, he says here in verse 8, this, he declares, is still more necessary for men like ourselves, for soldiers have often feared an enemy without reason, and the march which they thought most dangerous has in fact been most secure. But folly brings no repose. Fear haunts it both in the van and in the rear of the column, and both flanks are in panic. Folly is pursued and confronted by peril. It blenches at everything. It is unprepared. It is frightened even by auxiliary troops. But the wise man is fortified against all inroads. He is alert. He will not retreat before the attack of poverty or of sorrow or of disgrace or of pain. He will walk undaunted both against them and among them. So what's he saying here? Okay, so he's further expanding upon this simile, and he's saying that it's actually more prudent. Okay, he says that there's still more. It's more necessary for men like ourselves. And he's saying because soldiers often, they think that there's going to be an attack, but there's not. And so it's a fear without reason, whereas we are always under attack. It is always coming, all right? And he's saying that, folly is pursued and confronted by peril. So if you are in folly, you are definitely going to fall into peril as well. And it's gonna attack from every side. But he says the wise man is fortified against all inroads. Okay, he's alert. He's not gonna let poverty, sorrow, disgrace, or pain stop him, and so he's prepared in all fronts. All right. In verse 9, he says, "We humans are being fettered and weakened by many vices. We have wallowed in them for a long time, and it is hard for us to be cleansed. We're not merely defiled; we are dyed by them." But to refrain from passing from one figure to another, I will raise this question, which I often consider in my own heart. Why is it that folly holds us with such an insistent grasp? Is it primarily because we do not combat it strongly enough? Because we do not struggle towards salvation with all our might? Secondly, because we do not put sufficient trust in the discoveries of the wise and do not drink in their words with open hearts. We approach this great problem in too trifling a spirit. So what he's really saying here is, okay, here's the thing that I want to understand. Okay, we've got a lot of vices as humans, but he wants to know, look, why is it folly? Why is it that it's just we fall into it so often that we cannot get away from folly? All right, and he's saying that it's one of two things, perhaps, right? Is it because we don't fight it strongly enough? We don't struggle towards salvation with all our might. We're not just pushing as hard as we can, or we don't trust the wise. We're not listening to wise men and just drinking up their words with open hearts. Okay, we're just approaching our problems as too trifling of a spirit, is what he's saying here. Okay, in verse 10, he says, "But how can a man learn in the struggle against his vices an amount that is enough, if the time which he gives to learning is only the amount left over from his vices? None of us goes deep below the surface. We skim the top only, and we regard the smattering of time spent in the search for wisdom as enough to spare us for a busy man." So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, how can you actually learn to actually struggle against the vices if the only time you're giving to overcoming your vices is the time that's left over from your vices? You're spending so much time in your vices, and then whatever time you have left over, that's when you're spending. You need that time. You need the time that's actually occupying you by the vices in order to fight the vices, is what he's saying. So he's putting forth this dilemma. He says we don't go deep below the surface. We're not digging deep enough. We only skim the top. Okay, and that's the thing, is because we're too busy. We're too busy to work on the things that matter, our character. In verse 11, he says, "What hinders us most of all is that we are too readily satisfied with ourselves. If we meet with someone who calls us good men or sensible men or holy men, we see ourselves in his description." Isn't this funny, right? Is this true, right? How much do we take the flattery? Oh, we're good, all right? Not content with praise and moderation, we accept everything that shameless flattery heaps upon us, as if it were our due. We agree with those who declare us to be the best and wisest men, although we know that they are given to much lying. And we are so self-complacent that we desire praise for certain actions when we are especially addicted to the very opposite. Yonder person hears himself called most gentle while he is inflicting tortures, or most generous while he is engaging in looting, or most temperate while he is in the midst of drunkenness and lust. Thus it follows that we are unwilling to be reformed just because we believe ourselves to be the best of men. So what he's saying here is he's saying that our ego is too big, right? We're fine with someone giving us a compliment we don't deserve. How many times have you been in a situation where you know you're not as good as what people are saying you are? Now, again, it doesn't mean to be harsh, overly harsh on yourself and never take a compliment. But he's saying that sometimes we're just too satisfied with that. We're willing to have someone think us a thing than actually be the thing, and that's a problem. All right, he goes on to say Alexander was roaming as far as India, ravaging tribes that were built but little known, even to their neighbors. During the blockade of a certain city, while he was reconnoitering the walls and hunting for the weakest spot in the fortifications, he was wounded by an arrow. Nevertheless, he long continued the siege, intent on finishing what he had begun. The pain of his wound, however, as the surface became dry and as the flow of blood was checked, increased. His leg gradually became numb as he sat his horse, and finally, when he was forced to withdraw, he exclaimed, "All men swear that I am the son of Jupiter, but this wound cries out that I am mortal." Okay, so he's talking about Alexander the Great here, and he's saying that, look, Alexander took an arrow. He took an arrow to the leg. He was sieging the city, okay? And he did it for as long as he could, but then he got to a point where his leg was numb, and he just couldn't go on. And he said that all these men are saying, "I'm Jupiter," okay? Who's Jupiter? Jupiter is Zeus, okay? It is the highest Greek or Roman god. But he's saying, no, this wound shows that I am mortal. So Alexander had the humility to admit that he was not as great as people said that he was. That he understood that about himself. All right? He's using that as an example. In verse 13, he says, "Let us also act in the same way. Each man according to his lot in life is stultified by flattery. We should say to him who flatters us, 'You call me a man of sense, but I understand how many of the things which I crave are useless, and how many of the things which I desire will do me harm. I have not even the knowledge which satiety teaches to animals, of what should be the measure of my food or my drink. I do not yet know how much I can hold.'" So this is interesting, because I was just thinking this as I was reading this. So I was like, man, I just went downstairs and ate some chocolates, before I did this. And it's not a lot. It's not a big deal. But I'm like, man, will I ever learn? Will I ever really learn? What is the point of the why would I indulge in these pleasures that make no sense, right? I've got a pretty good physique, but I'll never reach the physique that I would like to reach because I never learn, it seems, right? And that's what he's saying here. Is he's saying, look, when someone flatters you, you should actually realize that, hey, there's a lot of shit that I don't know. There's a lot of shit I don't have figured out. You should be thinking about this instead of just taking it, right? Again, it doesn't mean to not accept compliments, but you get the point. In verse 14, he says, "I shall now show you how you may know that you are not wise. The wise man is joyful, happy and calm, unshaken. He lives on a plane with the gods." Now go, question yourself. If you are never downcast, if your mind is not harassed by any apprehension, though anticipation of what is to come, it day or night, your soul keeps on its even and unswerving course, upright and content with itself. Then you have attained the greatest good that mortals can possess. If, however, you seek pleasures of all kinds in all directions, you must know that you are a far shot of wisdom as you are short of joy. You are as far short of wisdom as you are short of joy. Joy is the goal which you desire to reach, but you are wandering from the path. If you expect to reach your goal while you're in the midst of riches and official titles, in other words, if you seek joy in the midst of cares, these objects of which you strive so eagerly as if they would give you happiness and pleasure are merely causes of grief. It's a wonder, you wonder sometimes whether or not the Stoics had an introduction to Buddhist philosophy, and I think that they did. I would have to look that up to see, but it is, I mean, the truth is the truth, I suppose, is what you could say about this. But it's so interesting what he says here. It's so interesting that, he says here, are you actually this? Here's how you can know that you're not wise. A wise man is joyful, happy, calm, and unshaken. He lives on a plane with the gods. He's like, do you do this? Are you never downcast? Right? Are you fearful? Do you have apprehension? Right? What is it? Okay. He's saying that the greatest gift that you can possess is that you are full of joy. Okay. You're as far short of wisdom as you are short of joy. Joy is the goal which you desire. But if you think you're going to get it by riches, by titles, by the pleasures which you're going after, You're wrong. It just merely causes you grief. And you're wrong and wrong and wrong, and you keep on going down the wrong path. And he's saying that, wow, we have so far to go, but this is the truth. Okay? It says, all men of this stamp, I maintain, are pressing on the pursuit of joy, but they do not know where they may obtain a joy that is both great and enduring. One person seeks it in feasting and self-indulgence, another in canvassing for honors and being surrounded by a throng of clients, another in his mistress, another in the idle display of culture and in literature that has no power to heal. All these men are led astray by delights which are deceptive and short-lived, like drunkenness, for example, which pays for a single hour of hilarious madness by a sickness of many days, or like applause and the popularity of an enthusiastic approval, which are gained and atoned for at the cost of great mental disquietude. So he's saying here, look, everyone's looking for joy, but they don't know where to obtain it. Not the joy that's great and enduring. He's saying that one person is going out and feasting, another person is trying to get status and honor and all these things, and just momentary pleasure, and that's what we're constantly doing, right? And if you think about it, that may be what your life is. I mean, that is what your life is, right? I mean, let's be honest here. It's me too, right? And so it's like, what will bring us the true joy? And that's where Seneca comes back to philosophy, is like studying yourself and learning these concepts and letting go of these things and practicing this non-attachment and just being quiet and content with yourself and being content with what you have. And that's what will bring you the true joy in life. But let's read on. Reflect, therefore, on this, that the effect of wisdom is a joy that is unbroken and continuous. So he's saying here that wisdom is what brings you this joy, okay? The mind of a wise man is like the ultra-lunar firmament. Eternal calm pervades that region. You have, then, a reason for wishing to be wise. If the wise man is never deprived of joy, this joy springs only from the knowledge that you possess the virtues. None but the brave, the just, the self-restrained can rejoice. So this is an interesting thing here where he's talking about, well, where does joy come from? It comes from wisdom. And when I think about this, and I think about how is this connected, right? How can being wise make you joyful? It's because it comes from awareness. Awareness is the greatest thing which you can possess. And the more awareness you have, the more kind you'll be to other people, the less wrong things you'll do, right? All of the follies that we have in life, they come from a lack of awareness. They come from us not understanding things fully. And the more that we devote our lives to philosophy and wisdom, and that's why philosophy is such a big deal, the more that we gain understanding, we gain awareness. We are aware. We are aware of why people do things that we do. We are aware of our own actions, our own emotions, our own feelings, and our own desires. And as we become aware of these things and we become aware of what the outcome of many of the things that we desire are, then we become wise. And through that wisdom, we become joyful because we are able to let go of the things that we should let go of. We understand the way things work. We're not hurt by our fellow man because we understand where he's coming from. We understand that the reason why he's treating us in the way that he is, that we don't like, is because he is acting from a place of unawareness, a lack of awareness, and of pain himself, and that he's trying to pursue his own desires, which are only going to lead to his own downfall. And we understand that that is the reason why those things are happening to us. And when we do that, then we don't take offense as much, and we don't feel those pains. Reflect, therefore, on this, that the effect of wisdom... Verse 17. And when you query, what do you mean? Do not the foolish and the wicked also rejoice? I reply, no, more than lions who have caught their prey. When men have wearied themselves with wine and lust, when night fails them before the debauch is done, when the pleasures which they have heaped upon a body that is too small to hold them begin to fester, at such times they utter in their wretchedness those lines of Virgil. Thou knowest how, amid false glittering joys, we spent that last of nights. So he's saying, yeah, the wicked, are they, don't they rejoice? Yeah, sure. They do. But the thing is, it's not real joy because they do these things and then they have to pay the bill. They have to pay the price of this. And there's always regret involved in this. Pleasure lovers spend every night amid false glittering joys, and just as if it were their last. But the joy which comes to the gods and to those who imitate the gods, is not broken off, nor does it cease, but it would surely cease were it borrowed from without. Just because it is not in the power of another to bestow, neither is it subject to another's whims. That which fortune has not given, she cannot take away. Farewell. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that which fortune has not given, she cannot take away. And so if your joy, if your pleasure in life, if the thing that makes you happy in life comes from something that has been brought upon you, but not from within, from without, something external, it cannot last, and it is not true joy, and it can be taken away, and it will. And so that's the thing to remember, is it's not about the money, it's not about the girls, it's not about the cars, it's not about the status, it's not about the applause of the people, it's not about any of those things. It's about the things that are internal that bring you the true joy in life. And we'll see you next time. Take care.